Hello, everyone. I'm Asha Nayaswami, and we're continuing with our sheltering in place um, fireside chats. Let's begin with the prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Inspire and guide us, that we may feel your presence within us and act in this world as your channels, sharing thy love and thy bliss with all. Om. Peace. Amen. Well, what we're going to start in with today, which is probably going to take us at least several days, maybe even a whole week to get through, is a document that Swamiji wrote in 2003, which is called The Way of Ananda Sanghis. And in the book Lightbearer, I talk about it. It's on a summary of The Way of Ananda Sangha is on page 490. To put on my glasses, the print's too small. Give me a second here. 490, that's correct. And it's not quite every word of what he wrote, but it's an excerpt, which it's the essential points is what I really want to say. And so before I start working with it, I'm going to work proper from actually, this is called Guidelines of Conduct for Members of the Ananda Sevaka Order. And this edition of this document was written decades earlier, but this edition of it, which was put out a little bit later, also includes the complete Way of Ananda Sanghi. So I'll be reading from this. If you just go onto Google and literally type in Way of Ananda Sanghi, Sanghi, it'll lead you right to the page on ananda.org where all the information that I'm working from is there. So let me just give you an idea of what the context is and why I think this is important and useful to us. Swamiji's way in developing Ananda was not to declare what we were going to be and then try to get us all to form into that. I mean, that's often the way people do things. They write a manifesto, and these are the things that we're going to do, and we all get together. Even communities start this, where we all get together. These are our rules, these are our ideals, and we're going to mold ourselves into them. This is how we're going to behave. This is what people are going to be expected. Swamiji's way was quite the opposite. He would try to create a flow of energy. And then when that energy and the consciousness behind that energy, I mean, the actual principles of Ananda were extremely clear, because the principles of Ananda were the teachings of Yogananda and the art of self-realization. But of course, that's a very big story. And how it was going to specifically manifest, Swami himself, his way of creating always was to be very clear about the vibration that he was trying to create, and then let the form express from that vibration, rather than think of the vibration first, or the form first, and try to, as I was trying to say, to mold people into it. So much of the time, Swami would only articulate something like after it had been our way of life. It had been simply what we were doing, and then he would articulate it. This booklet I have here, Guidelines of Conduct, Guidelines for Conduct of Members of the Ananda Sevaka Order. The whole Sevaka Order itself, which was formalizing many aspects of Ananda life, came 15 or 20 years after Ananda life had been focused and formalized in that way. And then he articulated what was already present. It was an ideal way of leadership and something that we've all tried to emulate, because it grew from the inside out. You see, that the same way that spirituality manifests from the inside out, Ananda itself has come from right understanding, and then right behavior is the natural expression of that, rather than trying to suppress our energies to match a certain form. So, about, what would it have been? Somewhere probably, I'm trying to remember when the Sevak order was first put into place. Somewhere probably in the 90s, maybe even in the 80s. It's irrelevant for this discussion, because the Way of Ananda Sanghi, which is what I want to say now, happened right after Swamiji moved to India. I've talked about that. I talk about Swami moving to India in great detail in this book, so I'm not going to tell the whole story. But it's very interesting, and I've talked about it here and there. Actually, I talked about it in my last class of Conversations with Yogananda, which I just gave a week or so ago. Because after he finished Conversations with Yogananda, Swamiji, it was a huge milestone for him, because it was the last. He'd put into book form all the notes he'd taken when he was living with Master, and it was really a watershed moment. And almost literally the same day that he finished that book, he felt inspired by Master to go to India. He was 77 years old, and he had begun to think he would never have that call. Because Master, when Master was living, had wanted Swami to go to India. And so in 1958, SRF sent him to India. He was there for 4 years, in charge of the work there. Well, working there. The SRF had someone else formally in charge, formally, not formally in charge. And that was part of the difficulty. And in the end, Swami was expelled from SRF. But he had tremendous momentum moving to bring Master's work to India. And then it was absolutely cut off and just stopped, and nothing of it came to manifestation. So from 1962 until 2003, it was always in Swamiji's mind that he had this unfinished work from Master. So in 2003, when he went to India in November, and a house had been rented for him. I was there. I wasn't part of the India team, but I was part of a group of us, 6, 8 of us, 10 maybe, who went at the beginning to help set it up for him. And so had been this house rented, this big ashram house in Gurgaon was rented, but in India, the houses are really barren. You have to put in a lot of the things that come with a rental house in America, cabinets and all furnishings, a lot of fixtures, just everything. It was a completely bare place. So for a couple of weeks, those of us who were helping, we shopped. We just bought and bought and bought. We bought furniture. We had to buy bedding. We had to just everything that you need in a house. Absolutely everything, down to spoons and forks and reading lamps and everything. So that's what we were doing. So, partly because we were living in this guest house. It was kind of an inn, you might call it. They call them guest houses. Swamiji just went to Kerala, I think, for a holiday for about 2 weeks, to just get some rest, because he hadn't really had a break since writing Conversations with Yogananda, and because there was no house ready anyway. So while he was there in Kerala, he was thinking constantly about, what was going to happen now that he was going to launch this whole work in India after all these years. What was appropriate? How was he supposed to do it? How should it be focused? What should he communicate? He'd known India in 1962. Now this is nearly 50 years later. Like, what is appropriate for India? And while he was on holiday, as he put it, he was woken up at 3 a.m. with these powerful ideas that just demanded that he get out of bed, wake up, get out of bed, and write them down. Now, the word Sangha, which means fellowship, it's really the Indian word for fellowship. It's Hindi, I presume, Hindi or I don't think it's Sanskrit, whatever, but it's an Indian language. The word Sangha is widely used. The Buddhists use the word Sangha a lot. It means the fellowship, the family, the people that you're with. When uh, when Master named his work, he called it Yagoda Satsanga. Satsanga means fellowship with truth. And when he came to America, he translated that into self-realization fellowship. And then in America, he used the word church. He put the word church onto it. And in 1990, when Ananda began to expand beyond the borders of, Ananda was well expanded beyond the borders of Ananda village, but the Ananda clearly was taking up a mission that was going to be more than just communities. For a long time, Swamiji kept Ananda defined as a community so as not to be trying to compete on the same ground that Self-Realization Fellowship was doing. But in 1990, it was obvious that there was no reason for Ananda to hold back. And so we took the name Ananda Church of Self-Realization, which prompted a lawsuit, a dispute over who owned the name and various things like that. And we ended up with 12 years of litigation in an effort by SRF to hold on to a monopoly of Yogananda's teachings, which effort failed because of various things that Yogananda himself did and because of the laws of the United States. But in the midst of that, we are really well invested millions of dollars and hundreds of hours by now into becoming Ananda Church of Self-Realization. And Swami says at lunch one day with the legal team and our attorney, you know, church isn't really a very good word anyway. He said in Italy, all of Europe, especially in Italy where we were based, he said church means Catholic church. It's just ridiculous to call ourselves a church. It doesn't make any sense to anyone. And he says in India, church does not have a positive connotation because it was the English missionaries who came in and just, were so scornful of Indian culture that the very idea of church means oppression, and the Indians just reject it. Swami said, we should use Master's word. We should become Sangha. We should be Ananda Sangha. And I described that moment in this book here because we were so deep into this legal battle, and all of a sudden Swami's just like tossing it out. Now, of course, the legal fight was only very small about the name. It was really about the right to be disciples, to publicly declare ourselves disciples. The name itself wouldn't have been enough. It catalyzed it, but it wasn't the cause. And our lawyer, John Parsons, who was very great, he was and is fantastic. He knew how to relate very effectively. He kind of nods his head. He had this way of nodding his head, so you would feel like you were in agreement with him. Well, sir, he said to Swamiji, that may be true, but what if we win the legal fight to have the right to use it? And then if we don't want to, we at least have the choice. And so we thought that was quite sensible. But when he went to India, there was no question about being the Ananda Church. It was out of the question. So we were Ananda Sangha right away. That's what we would be in India. And globally, that is the word we use much more than church, Ananda Sangha. That's our official name. So Swami woke up, and in all the years that Ananda had existed, we never had what you might call a credo. We never had like, this is what we believe. And it's an obvious thing for a spiritual group to have that. You could figure out what Ananda was. It wasn't difficult, but it had never been articulated. So at 3 a.m, Swamiji just wakes up and he suddenly has the articulation. And it was so interesting. This is 2003. Ananda started in 1968. And in 2003, he finally found a way to write it down, which is absolutely brilliant. And it is the foundation of Ananda. If anybody asks you, what is Ananda? What do we stand for? What are our teachings? The Way of Ananda Sanghi is what it is. Now, it's just a couple of pages, but I'm not going to read all of it now. I'm going to read it a piece at a time. And over the next days, we'll go through it. And in Swami's usual way, he's so brilliant at just getting the essentials. And in this case, describing essentials that cannot be made into dogma. That's what he was always worried about. Once you define something, as Swami said, the definition becomes the reality. And the more exact the definition, the more clear you think you are about the reality. When in fact, the more exact the definition, usually the farther away you are from reality. So just like the guidelines for members' conduct, this is so seminal. Okay, so it starts, and this defines what Ananda is, but it also defines to a very large extent, really until we get down to um, practically the last point, where we talk about being disciples of Master and practicing Kriya Yoga. These are really principles that that Sangha means the fellowship of bliss. So Ananda also happens to be our name, but this is also the way of those who seek to be in the company of bliss and to be with other bliss seekers, truth seekers. So Swami starts out, this is the prayer of the Ananda Sanghi. Sanghi with an I on the end means the person who is part of the Sangha. So it's the principles of the Sangha, but it's the way of the Sanghi. And this is also like Swamiji. Rather than saying this is what the organization is, he says this is what one person who is part of this fellowship, this is how we think about ourselves. So first he has this prayer. May the divine light awaken and purify my heart and bring enlightenment to all beings. So let's just spend a moment there. Swamiji, even though by the end of the Way of Ananda Sanghi, he brings in Master in our line of gurus, he brings in our specific teachings, but the fundamental prayer is, may the divine light awaken and purify my heart. So right away, we are in a world that everyone can embrace. And Swami's not doing that in any sense out of a sort of a desire to be all things to all people. What he's trying to do, or sort of a commitment to the kind of ecumenicalism that hesitates to take a stand, because if I take too strong a stand, then I will be separating myself from you. And so everybody tries to be a little less than they are so as not to be offensive, although in the privacy of their own home, they still think that their own way is right. So it's not that. But what he's wanting us to understand, that the way of Ananda Sanghi, when you go deep into its true reality, there is no form to it, and there is no specificity. Anyway, it's not so specific that it separates you from the whole. So the prayer is, the prayer is to the divine light. What could be more fundamental? May the divine light awaken and purify my heart. So also implied in awaken and purify, there's very deep philosophical truths, which is, I don't have to become something I'm not. I just have to I have to awaken from my sleep. What happens when we're asleep? What happens when we're asleep is we're unconscious. The whole world is still going on. Nothing has changed. But when we go to sleep, we become unconscious of it. And as soon as we wake up, then suddenly we're back into this ongoing, more or less objective reality that we have to relate to. But it's not like that world is created suddenly. It's that we lost touch with it because our consciousness became too low. So the first part of this prayer is to the most fundamental in the Bible, let there be light. I mean, that's the beginning. In the beginning, light and sound. And in St. John, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And John is referring to the Om vibration, and Genesis is referring to the fundamental nature of the divine as light. There's no form. Word does not mean, as some people interpret the word of the Bible, word means sound itself. That thought becomes sound, consciousness to become sound. The infinite spirit beyond manifestation begins to manifest, and it manifests as light. God said, let there be light. But God existed in the Bible there, before there was light, God said, "Let there be light." So light is the connecting link to us in creation. So we pray to the divine light and we ask the divine light to awaken us, to illuminate us, would be another way to say that, because we're lost in our unconsciousness. We need to be brought out of our unconsciousness to wake up. And then it speaks to purify the heart. And once again, the potential, the divine potential of the heart is there. It is just covered over. This is why Jesus said, "Blessed are the pure in heart." And that's why I gave another, one of these conversations was about the purification ceremony, which where the devotee says, "I seek purification by the grace of God." The word meaning that I don't need to be different than I am. I just need to release those things that are that are clouding, that are shadowing my ability to be who I am. And that's what Jesus said. We take away the impurities, and the gold is already there. This is also related to the idea of self-realization. We don't have to acquire something, we just have to realize it. So when we say, "May the divine light awaken and purify my heart," and also we're focusing on the feeling, by implication, on the feeling nature, on the feeling of love. So this isn't a matter of acquiring a great deal of knowledge. So right again from the beginning, Swamiji is defining the way of the Ananda Sanghi. It's about purity of heart. It's about coming out of delusion and being the pure, childlike, free self that we are. May the divine light awaken and purify my heart, and then immediately, and bring enlightenment to all beings. So the way of Ananda Sanghi is to become who we already are, and also to look at God's manifestation everywhere, to look with compassion upon the needs of the whole world. So the prayer is not just for self. Awaken and purify my heart. It could just stay there. May the divine light awaken and purify my heart. That would be a perfectly valid prayer. But then we say, and bring enlightenment to all beings. And this is, you see, defining what it is to be an Ananda Sanghi, which is the nature of Ananda is that we are engaged with being a channel and with uplifting the world. The whole series of talks that I was giving just before now was on the basic principles that Swami wrote out that define the nature of an Ananda community. And we serve God in others. We're kind and respectful of others. We are compassionate toward the world. We are not renouncing it. We are not rejecting it. So here, just as simple, may the divine light awaken and purify my heart and bring enlightenment to all beings. Isn't that a wonderful prayer? Sometimes people often ask, sort of like, what mantra should I say? What should I say when I'm in difficult circumstances? How do I calm my heart when I'm faced with the suffering of others? May the divine light awaken and purify my heart and bring enlightenment to all beings. I've simplified it to say, Divine Mother, bless us all. But it's the same feeling. And Swamiji created so much that is so profound, and he created it so continuously that a whole incarnation of practice just sort of comes and goes. And that's why I feel about this fundamental prayer of the Ananda Sanghi. We should emblazon it on our hearts and put it on our walls and have it be on the doorway of all our homes, because the whole of who we are as devotees and who we are as devotees of Ananda Sanghis, it's all right there. So that's the beginning. Then point number one. There are actually there's 7 points, and point number 2 has a number of subparagraphs. There's 7 subparagraphs under point number 2, so it's really almost only that, just a little more. It's 3 pages, 3 pages of type in this book. Number 1, we believe in a single, blissful, eternal consciousness. And then Swami uses the best word for God that there is, Satchidananda. And I will speak a little bit about this now and more tomorrow. Satchidanandam is to my mind, is the perfect word for the word God. God is a very poor word in English. I'll speak to this just for a moment here. Oftentimes when people tell me they're atheists or agnostics, they don't believe in God, I say, well, what does the word God mean to you? And then they describe some exceedingly unattractive reality that any compassionate thinking person would reject. And it isn't so much really that people have rejected God, it's that the word God in English has no meaning. If you really think about it, if you say God and you're devoted to Christ, then you mean Jesus Christ. Or if you have a specific theology, you can say the word God, and that theology is what you're talking about. Or if you have a bias or an anger against God, you say the word God, and that's what you're talking about. But all by itself, it can't be defined. It has no meaning. The word Sat, Chit, Ananda is a triple word made up of 3 Sanskrit words, which are very specific. Sat means eternity, ever existing. That's what Sat. Sat is the ever existing power of spirit. Sat, Chit, Ananda, existence, consciousness, and Chit also involves the feeling nature, not merely just impersonal consciousness, but the experienced consciousness. Sat Chit Ananda. Ananda means bliss. Eternally existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss. That's what Sat Chit Ananda means. Ananda means ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss. Well, you can say, I don't believe in any of those things, but at least we know what we're believing or not believing in. Also, you can see it's absolutely impersonal. It's no religion can claim to own ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss. No theology, no preacher, no single book could ever encompass, ever existing, ever conscious, ever new bliss. And also, when we ask ourselves, what do I aspire to? What do I wish to become? Many people are drawn to the spiritual path because of the fear of death, because of the idea that our consciousness is going to be extinguished. It creates an enormous metaphysical crisis if the end of life is to be obliterated, if creation really has no purpose and we're just simply snuffed out and cease to exist. For many people, that's a terrifying prospect. A friend of mine, when he was about 6, asked his father about death. And the father could only imagine, because he was not as deep a thinker as his son turned out to be. All he could do was reassure him that he was only 6 and he wasn't going to die very soon. But the boy was having a profound metaphysical crisis. This was, of course, carried over from past lives. It wasn't that that death was, the problem wasn't that death was not going to come for 50 years. The problem was that death was going to come, period. And at some point, he would cease to exist, and it terrified him. And that, of course, led him to a deep study and the understanding that the yogis have asserted forever and that we can experience, which is that there is no such thing as death, because Satchidanandam is ever existing. And as we go through the way of Ananda Sanghi, we are ourselves Satchidanandam. And realizing that is what the spiritual path is. So the first way, which I'm just going to read now without saying more because we're almost at the end, we believe in a single, blissful, eternal consciousness. Then Swami defines it, uses the word Satchidanandam, which pervades the entire universe, unifying it and all creatures, these are beautiful words, in a bond of mutual service. Tomorrow we'll talk about this. This blissful consciousness is the underlying reality of all existence. It precedes the very manifestation of the universe. Isn't that glorious? We believe in this ever-existing, ever-conscious, ever-new bliss, and that all of creation is manifested by that. And we are bound to each other by mutual service. It's just, one can really literally meditate on this for the rest of our lives. This just simple first one. What does it mean to be bound together in Satchidanandam by this bond of mutual service? Well, that is the cliffhanger on which we will end particular today's talk, and we'll take this up again tomorrow. God bless you.